I'm JD and welcome to my channel. Here we're going to talk about some of the things that could go wrong with a watch. In this case it's a picture or diagram, breakout diagram of a pocket watch. If you're into watchmaking and into watch movements, you kind of understand what all the components are of the pocket watch. But let's start off with the mainspring here and some of the problems that you could have with the mainspring. So the first thing is the wheels. So if I look at the actual wheels on this watch, the wheels on the watch go round and round, right? So if I look at the wheels here, we've got the a couple of wheels here. We've got the wheel that's over the top of the mainspring, and this is the wheel that we're talking about right here. And this wheel interacts with the this wheel here. So this is the crown wheel, and it's used to wind the watch. And this wheel interacts with the ratchet wheel, and we have a click spring here that kind of keeps the ratchet wheel in place as you wind it, and that puts tension on the mainspring as you wind the watch. So that's how this kind of works at a very high level. Let me erase this here for a second. So the problems that you could have here is teeth problems. So in fact, you know, each one of these teeth is designed in a way to mesh properly with each one of these teeth on the ratchet wheel. And if you have a bent tooth, then the interaction between the ratchet wheel and this wheel would be inappropriate to design, right? Or off a spec, I'll say. So that problem could cause you to have a winding problem with the watch. It wouldn't be an operating problem with the watch, it would be a winding problem with the watch. The other thing too, as I mentioned in an earlier video, is that if you have a problem with the arbor coming straight through here, then as well, if it's at an angle, for example, for some reason, then you could have a problem with the winding of the watch and the running of the watch in this case. So those are two things that could happen. And as I look at the watch here, the other thing is, so we've got, continuing on with the gears, you've got the actual mainspring barrel down here and its gears, and the mainspring barrel is interacting with the pinion. It's doing it right, if I go just to draw my line here, here's the pinion right there of the center wheel. So it's pushing the pinion of the center wheel. And again, the problem there could either be a tooth problem on the mainspring barrel, where you have a bent tooth or a broken tooth, or it could be a tooth problem on the pinion here, or it could be dirt that's in the pinion. So if you've got actual dirt in the pinion in any part of the watch, or dirt in the mainspring barrel between the teeth, for example, that could in fact stop your watch. And I have had issues with that in the past. I'm only mentioning things where I've had some problems. So the other thing, looking at the mainspring barrel again, is that you've got the mainspring itself wrapping around a few things here. If the mainspring is hooked properly to the arbor, there's a hook that hooks the mainspring coiled around the arbor. If it's hooked properly, you have no issues. If it's not hooked properly, then it could slip and not retain the power because it's then slipped. The other problem you could have is the mainspring and how it's hooked to the outside of the barrel. And it just depends on the type of mainspring you have. But if you have a T mainspring, it's a mainspring. Basically, you've got a mainspring like that. And at the very end of that mainspring, you've got soldered in or welded in or whatever a T, and that T actually attaches to the top and bottom of the barrel itself. This would be the lid on this side, and this would be the actual barrel on this side. And if it's broken, the T is broken on one side, then this whole unit could slip out of place, causing you to not get any power in the watch. So that's a problem as well, and they're very I find them difficult to put back. I do these by hand because they're hard to put back, the mainsprings. So the other thing is you've got the mainspring coming around here like this, and if you don't have the mainspring seated properly in the barrel, here's the edge of the barrel here. If the mainspring is too high in the barrel, then it could touch the cap of the barrel. If it touches the cap of the barrel, then you've got friction wherever it's touching, and that friction could cause the watch again to stop. So that's a few things that could go wrong with the barrel itself. I did mention earlier that if when the watch is installed and the mainspring barrel is installed and there's this plate that's coming over and there's a hole on the plate, and if the arbor is at an angle to the hole in that plate, then you could have a problem as well. If it's off like this, then there could be a problem as well. So that's a couple of things that could go wrong with the mainspring, the barrel, mainspring barrel. As well as having a broken mainspring. That's pretty common. I was told the other day that a mainspring is not set if the mainspring is actually larger than the movement itself. If someone could write me back and confirm if that's true, I'd really appreciate it, because you get mainsprings that are you take them out of the barrel and they look like that, and the movement size is like this, and you're saying, okay, this mainspring is actually set, so a lot of the power cannot be translated into movement of the mainspring barrel because the mainspring is set in position, and it just won't generate the power. I'm not sure how to describe it. I shouldn't have taken electrical engineering. I should have taken mechanical engineering. So I think my son would be very happy listening to me say that. So if the mainspring is not set, you have the movement. I'll draw the movement like this. There's the movement like this, and then you have the mainspring, and the mainspring is actually, if you laid it down on top of the movement, it's like this, and it's not set, so it's going to generate a lot of power. And this, again, I'm just relating this to pocket watches and not watches. So if someone could confirm that, that would again be a problem with the mainspring in the barrel. And a set mainspring if it's smaller than the actual movement size. So it's not going to be generating the power to force the barrel around and to interact with the pinion of the center wheel. So that's a few problems you could have here with a pocket watch. Then if I'm looking at the center wheel itself, as I mentioned earlier, you could have problems with bent teeth. I've had that happen before. And I mentioned in, I think, another video that if you find a problem with a bent tooth and the actual mainspring is stopping because it's not acting, or it's not interacting properly with the intermediate wheel, which is, this is number 1, this is number 2, this is number 3, if I can get that in there, the bottom one here. So this would be interacting with the pinion of number 3, and if you have a bent tooth, the watch could stop. And the only way of detecting that is if you put an actual mark on the wheel itself with a marker, and you watch that mark that go around, and you find out exactly when it stops every time, then you can kind of detect what tooth it is that's got the problem. So I actually had that problem before, and I had to actually straighten the tooth on the center wheel. It's a complex job to do, and if you have to anneal the tooth so it doesn't snap, it's a little harder. If you have to actually replace a tooth, it's very hard. I've never had to replace a tooth on a wheel. I don't think I have. Trying to think back, I don't think I have. But anyway, you can replace a tooth on a wheel, so that's another problem. So all wheels too have to be absolutely perfect from a specification perspective. So they cannot be bent in any way. So if you have a wheel like this and the pinion is coming through like this and the pivot's on the end here, there's the shaft, I should say, and there's the pinion there. And if this wheel is bent like that and it's not straight, as the line just came up there, then you have a big problem. Then the wheel's not going to act properly within the watch. So you can repivot a wheel if your pivot's broken. So if I've got a pivot that's broken here, a pivot that's broken here. This is the one for the seconds hand, that's the fourth wheel. Then you can repivot the wheel. I've done this a few times. I did this for a carriage clock movement for the local watch society. They tend to come to me to make new, to install new pivots on their watches because they're looking at clocks and carriage clocks. And I do pocket watches, which is much smaller, and I do watches. So they love me because they can actually, I can actually use my lathe and actually replace a pivot or repivot the watch, as they call it. So that's another thing that could go wrong is that the pivot could break on the watch. I find that this fourth wheel, let me erase this stuff here so it's a little more clear. This is the fourth wheel right here. And this fourth wheel pivot is where the seconds hand goes on, right? So if I just draw a seconds hand, there it is there. And that second hand rotates like that. And, oh, it went the wrong way. It actually rotates like this. So this here could break because if you look at the plate for the watch, like this, the only place that that pivot sticks out is right here. If this is the face, let me just draw another, see if I can draw this. That's the face of the watch, and the pivot is actually coming up right to the face. And when you take this face off the watch, you remove this from the watch, the face, it's leaving the pivot exposed to be bent or broken. So I've always said in my videos to be very cautious when you're after you take this off, when you flip the watch around or when you rest it on someplace, to make sure that this pivot is safe, because the pivot of the fourth wheel sticks out there and that can be easily damaged. So you have to be very cautious about that. So that's another thing I've found in watches where you actually have the fourth wheel pivot has been bent for some reason. And this here being bent in any direction would cause a problem with the watch stopping, because the second hand that's installed on that pivot would be at an angle, and that angle would cause this seconds hand to touch the actual sub dial if this is at an angle. So you really have to watch that pivot. So that's another problem that you can have with the watch as I go through the movement here. The next thing is I'm going to go right into the escapement. So the escapement has these little tiny feet here, and these feet interact with the pallet fork jewels here. And if the feet are bent in any way, if there's a bend on these feet in any way, the watch will stop. So if these feet have an issue, then the watch, they're not going to interact appropriately with the jewels in the pallet fork, and that will stop the watch. So the cure for that is bending the feet back or installing a new escapement. Bending the feet back is usually not an option. I've done it once before where I've seen the feet bent, a foot here bent, and then and causing a problem, and I've been able to bend that back. So that can cause a big issue. So, and again, as I mentioned before, making sure that your pinions are clean. So the pinions that are part of the watch movement, like here, for example, that these pinions do not have dirt in them. So that's a pinion there. So if you look at this watch, there's pinions everywhere in this watch. There's another pinion there. Every wheel has a pinion. There's another one there. That's the one going for the center wheel in this particular movement. I think this might be a Rolex movement, because this wheel here would pop up above the plate. And that's Rolexes and Tudors and Omegas. Actually, I saw an Omega recently that has the wheel above the plate. I made a video on that particular Omega. So that's a problem. So then the next problem as I go through the watch here is that the jewel here. So these jewels are part of the pallet fork, and they have to be installed in a certain way. They have to be the depth of the jewel fitting into into the actual pallet fork has to be absolutely accurate. The angle of the face of these jewels has to be absolutely to spec, or they won't interact as they're specified with the actual feet in the escapement. So that can be an issue. Another issue I've seen with the watches as I go through this movement is that the pallet fork here rotates, and it provides uh, force, I'll say right and left. I'll use counterclockwise, clockwise, so right and left, and it's pushing the actual impulse jewel that's attached to the balance, and that impulse jewel will push it left and right and swing the balance around one way and then swing it around the other way, right? So that what I've seen before is that I've had the pallet fork bent ever so slightly, and how these things get bent I couldn't tell you, but I've had a bend in the pallet fork right there, for example, and and that bend in the pallet fork, if the pallet fork is too high, the impulse jewel there's friction between the pallet fork and the actual roller table, and the roller table is under here, and there's a the impulse jewel that's shellacked into the roller table, and if this is too high, it's touching the roller table, which causes friction, and the watch will either stop or run extremely poorly. If it's too low, then the mouth of the pallet fork will not interact with the jewel. So if I look at this interaction again, let me just see if I can draw this without screwing it up. So you have your your roller table like this, and then you have your jewel that would be like this. That's your impulse jewel, and then you have the mouth of the pallet fork. I'm going to overdraw this here a little bit. But there's your mouth of your pallet fork, and the impulse jewel goes into the mouth of the pallet fork. Let me see. So it goes in this way, and it pushes it one way like this, and then it pushes it the other way like that. And and if this here is too low, then it's going to miss the impulse jewel. The impulse jewel will be above the mouth of the pallet fork, and you won't be able to impulse, if I can use that term, impulse the actual balance. So the roller table interaction and the actual balance swinging around both ways. So that's a problem, and you can correct that. Sometimes that's due, and I said that in a different video, to the installation of the balance staff here, and the balance staff is not installed properly. It's either too high or too low. So it's up here too high or down too low, which can cause all kinds of problems with the actual interaction between the pallet fork and the balance, etc., etc. So, but the pallet fork problem, the pallet fork being bent, you can bend the pallet fork back very carefully. I would put it on a block and tap it, as opposed to grabbing it with a pair of pliers and trying to bend it. You're better off just tapping it on a block and using a stake from a staking set, and simply applying a little tap with your big mallet there. Let me just draw my mallet here. Is that a pretty good looking mallet? And you're just tapping downward on this, and you're straightening this arm up on the pallet fork. Now you're doing that with the pallet fork. It's out of the watch, and it's on a big, huge block. So your pallet fork's resting on a block like that, and you're tapping down like this. So that's, you don't do it obviously while the pallet fork is installed in the watch. So as I move along here with things I've seen and things I can correct, if I look at the watch, if I look at the balance sitting in here, I've got regulator pins right there. So, and the regulator pins slide along, I'll say along the hairspring, right? So, and if they slide in this direction, they're shortening the virtual length of the hairspring. If they slide in the other direction, more towards the stud, the hairspring stud, which is right here, then they're lengthening the virtual length of the hairspring. and that will slow the watch down. And if you shorten it, it will speed the watch up. The problems that you could have with the regulating pins that I've seen is that if I draw these regulating pins, let me see if I can do this, and I've got a pin like this and another pin like this, and in between that pin you have the hairspring coming through. So let's just draw the hairspring. This is the hairspring coming through, and if this pin is the distance here is too narrow, it can jam up the actual hairspring. If it's too wide, then the hairspring actually taps back and forth um, on the regulator pins, right? And if the hairspring is tapping back and forth on the regulator pins, it's actually not changing the virtual length of the hairspring. So, and if that happens, then you can't time the watch properly because your virtual length is regulated by the hairspring riding along, or sorry, the pins riding along the hairspring. So if it's too wide, that could be a problem. In one of the manuals I have, it actually tells you how to adjust these regulator pins so they're perfect, and how they interact with slowing down and speeding up the watch. The pins will always, the hairspring will always pulsate back and forth within these pins ever so slightly, but the distance between, the space between the pins regulates how much the hairspring, how much change there is in the virtual length of the hairspring um, with the tapping of those regulator, the tapping of the hairspring between the regulator pins. So it's that whole topic is a PhD in hairspring regulation itself. So anyway, that could be a problem if you've got if you've got the hairspring, these pins are bent in any way. The other thing I saw before is if I look at the the actual regulator pins again, and if I'm looking at them sideways, so I can only virtually see one pin. If this regulator pins are bent back slightly or forward slightly, and the hairspring is riding through the regulator pins like this. This is the hairspring. Then if the regulator pins are bent in this direction, it's changing, it's lengthening the virtual length of the hairspring. If they're bent this way, it's shortening the virtual length of the hairspring, which is speeding up the watch and or slowing down the watch. So these pins should be straight up and down, if I can say it that way, perfectly vertical. So you can check for that to make sure you don't have a problem with that. I have had problems again where the watch was running too fast and I couldn't slow the darn thing down. So in this case here, I've taken this regulator arm and moved it all the way to the end, which is in this case it would be right here. And it still wasn't enough to slow the watch down. So my next step was to actually look at the balance. And after examining the problem in great gory detail and actually looking at the regulator pins were bent a bit, so I had to straighten those up. It still wasn't enough. So I was looking at the actual balance itself, and I realized that there were timing screws in the balance. They're usually here and here, the opposite side, and mean time screws here and here on the opposite side. And somebody had put in timing washers on this here, on the side here. So you always have a set on one side and the other side. They're always equal. So when you poise the watch, then you don't have issues with the actual watch kind of having more weight on one side than the other. So, and I'm not going to go into poising the balance. That's like your tire on your car, and making sure when they put weights on your tire to make sure your tire is perfectly balanced all the way through. It's the same thing. So in this case, they were the timing screw. I'll just draw it like this. This is the timing screw. There's a slot for the timing screw. And they had put a series of washers, timing washers, in the timing screw. So when you add a timing washer, it's got weight on it. And if you add weight to the balance, it slows it down. So it's like a figure skater putting their arms out and stopping the quick spin and then spinning slowly. So they had put timing screws, and somebody on my blog or my YouTube channel said, "Hey, buddy, check to see if there's any timing screw or timing washers." I said timing screws, timing washers in there because that might be the issue. And I'll swear here, by golly, I did see timing washers in this darn thing. And so I had to unscrew the screw here, take the timing washers out, and put the screw back in. Somebody had put timing washers in to slow the watch down because the watch was running too fast. The watch was likely running too fast because the hairspring was either magnetic or dirty. So anyway, check for timing washers and make sure that you don't have any if you have a problem with regulating the watch at all. So the next topic here is magnetism. So when you have the hairspring like this, and I'll just draw it like this, there's the hairspring of the watch, and you have magnetism in the watch. This hairspring could stick, the leaf on the hairspring could stick to another leaf on the watch. And what that does is it virtually shortens the actual hairspring. So the hairspring would be shortened because it would be attached like this. Let me just do that like that, and there we go. And that one leaf would cause, the one leaf would cause that hairspring to be a whole lot shorter when it pulsates in and out. So as it's pulsating back and forth like this, it's pulsating inward, and it's pulsating outward, then magnetism could be the problem, making the hairspring leaf stick together. The other thing I've seen in hairsprings is let me draw the hairspring again, is oil. So I've seen oil, a bead of oil, causing the hairspring in there to stick together. So the hairspring actually stuck together because there was oil in that hairspring. So what I do with hairsprings is actually I throw them into lighter fluid. So I've got a big container like this. I'll I'll take the hairspring off the watch, and there's a collet, the hairspring collet. You can kind of see it right there, and I'll take the hairspring off the watch. I'll throw it into lighter fluid, and lighter fluid will completely clean that hairspring for me. There's likely other fluids you can use, but this is old school lighter fluid for pocket watches. So that cleans the hairspring nicely. So I think that might be it for now. I've gone through quite a few faults that you could find in the pocket watch and mainly in the running of the watch. So what I do recommend is that after you've reinstalled the watch, you run the train, which means that you're applying, there's even arrows here, but you're applying power on the watch here, and then this applies power to the center wheel in the opposite direction, and this applies power to the intermediate wheel, and this applies power, I think I've got my directions wrong. This applies power to the fourth wheel, where the seconds hand is, and this applies power to the escapement, whichever direction I'm going here. So it would be the opposite direction there. And then this applies power to the 2 jewels, making it go tick, 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 which applies power to the impulse jewel, which swings the balance clockwise, counterclockwise, and clockwise. So that's an issue. I guess I could say one more thing about this movement here. Your watch can be running fine and have a very strong amplitude, but you've got a beat error. And the beat error is simply, in very simple terms, that the balance swings in one direction, like this, and then it stops, say right here. And then when it swings back in the other direction, it stops right here. So, and if I'm looking at that, it's this swing is exactly the same. So I've got the same degrees of swing in both directions. And if I have a beat error, it's swinging in one direction a little more than the other direction. So it's going, say it's going clockwise this way, and it's swinging, say it's going 360 degrees in one direction, and then it's going 350 degrees in the other direction, and that will cause a beat error in the watch. It's not consistent, right? So let me look at this, and you can tell the beat error because if you look at the the pallet fork coming through here, and at rest, if the watch is at rest, you have banking pins on both sides, one side and the other side, and the pallet fork should be resting right in the center of the banking pins for a perfect bead error. So when you put the watch back together, you should be setting it up that the bead error is absolutely perfect, which means you're putting the hairspring on in the exact right position on the balance once it's studded to the balance cock. So you got a big balance cock here, you've got the hairspring studded to it, and then you've got the arm here and the pallet fork in between the banking pins, and it's absolutely perfect, and my bead error is 0. And this is what you're aiming for. So if you've got here banking pin, and your pallet fork, I'm just going to draw a shitty pallet fork here. So your pallet fork is coming through the banking pins, and this would normally be, and this is the center position, say, of the pallet fork. These distances are absolutely the same right here. And if you see the pallet fork resting more on one side than the other, then you have to rotate your hairspring to get that balance fork in the center. So let me look at it. It's the arm of the balance fork. So I'm going to draw that here in blue, and I'm going to go right into it. So I'm looking at it straight down. And if this thing is over here instead, slightly over, then you have to rotate the actual hairspring in this direction here to move this over so that's centered. So that's a problem you could have. It's not going to stop the watch, but it won't let you time it in different positions. So I think that's enough for today. If you've enjoyed this video, please tell me. If you need me to talk about more stuff, let me know as well. So thanks, I'm JD. Thanks for watching my channel. Please subscribe, please hit like, and we can talk about other things on pocket watches